At minus 50 degrees Celsius, survival is nearly impossible. Yet one freezing night, a German shepherd mother appeared at a Marine's cabin window, her paws pressed against the glass, her tiny pups shivering beside her. What followed wasn't just a rescue. It was a story so heartwarming, it melted hearts around the world. Outside, the world was nothing but endless white, swallowed by a merciless minus 50 degrees Celsius chill. Snow piled high against the wooden walls of a small cabin, where a lone Marine sat. Wrapped in layers of wool and silence, his breath formed icy clouds in the dim light of the lantern. And even inside, the bitter cold seeped through the cracks, gnawing at his bones. Isolation was heavy here. Days bled into nights, and nights into an unforgiving stillness. Beyond the frost-covered window, nothing stirred. No birds, no animals, not even the faintest trace of life. It was the kind of night where survival itself felt like a battle. And yet, as the Marine poured himself another cup of steaming coffee, he had no idea that a desperate knock on fate's door was only moments away. The Marine had just set his mug down when a faint sound broke through the roar of the storm. At first, he dismissed it as branches snapping under the weight of ice. But then it came again, a scratching, weak and persistent. Against the frosted glass of the window, he rose cautiously, boots crunching on the wooden floor, and peered out into the swirling white. His breath caught. Staring back at him were two eyes, wide, dark, and pleading. A German shepherd stood pressed against the glass, her muzzle dusted with snow, her paw raised as if begging for help. Beside her, huddled tightly against the drifting snow, were tiny pups, their small bodies shivering violently in the brutal cold. Their fur was stiff with frost, their whimpers muffled by the storm. The Marine blinked, hardly believing what he saw. In this frozen wasteland, where survival seemed impossible, a mother dog had carried her babies to his cabin, placing their fate entirely in his hands. For a moment, the Marine froze, his instincts torn between caution and compassion. He had seen strays before, and he knew that a desperate animal could be unpredictable. But as his gaze fell on the trembling pups pressed against their mother's legs, hesitation gave way to something stronger, a surge of human duty. He pulled his coat tighter and unlatched the heavy wooden door. Instantly, a blast of icy wind rushed inside, cutting through the warmth like a knife. Snowflakes swirled in, coating the floor in a thin white layer. The mother dog flinched at the sound, her eyes darting nervously, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she pressed closer, nudging one pup forward with her nose as if pleading. "Please, help them." The Marine crouched low, his voice steady but soft. "It's okay. You're safe now." Slowly, he held the door wider, giving them the choice. The pups stumbled clumsily toward the warmth, their tiny whimpers piercing the storm's roar. Finally, with a deep, cautious breath, the mother stepped inside. The cabin, moments ago filled only with silence, now carried the fragile sound of survival, the beginning of a bond forged in the coldest of nights. The Marine shut the door quickly, bracing it against the howling wind before turning back to the fragile guests. The pups collapsed onto the wooden floor, their bodies shivering uncontrollably. Their tiny breaths came out in desperate puffs, their whimpers barely audible over the crackle of the storm outside. Without hesitation, he moved to the fireplace. His hands, steady from years of discipline, worked swiftly as he stacked logs and struck a match. Soon, a flame leapt to life, spreading warmth through the cabin. The light flickered across the frost still clinging to the pup's fur, casting them in a fragile glow. That he grabbed extra blankets from his cot and carefully wrapped the pups, their trembling easing slightly as heat seeped back into their small bodies. The mother dog stood nearby, her body tense, eyes locked on him. She didn't growl, didn't move closer. She only watched, wary yet desperate. Minutes passed, and slowly the tension in the room shifted. The pups nestled into the blankets, their cries softening. The fire roared stronger, pushing back the chill. And for the first time that night, survival didn't feel impossible. It felt within reach. As the fire crackled and the room grew warmer, the Marine leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the fragile scene before him. The pups, wrapped tightly in wool, twitched softly in their sleep, their tiny chests rising and falling with renewed strength. The mother lay nearby, her head low but her eyes still watchful, every muscle poised to protect. The sight stirred something deep within him. He remembered cold nights on distant battlefields, when survival depended not on strength alone, but on the unshakable loyalty of the men beside him. He recalled the way soldiers huddled together for warmth, how comrades would sacrifice their own comfort to shield one another from danger. Looking at the German shepherd and her pups, he saw that same unyielding devotion. The mother, starving and exhausted, had braved the merciless storm for them, risking her life so her little ones might live. It was a loyalty he recognized, one that echoed the very core of his training, his service, and his soul. The Marine rose quietly, crouching near the pups to check on them. As he pulled the blanket back, his chest tightened. Their tiny paws were raw, their pads cracked and bleeding from the ice. Frost clung stubbornly to their fur, and their bellies were hollow, ribs faintly visible through their thin coats. His jaw clenched as he realized how close they had been to death. These weren't just wanderers. They had been starving, freezing, and suffering for days. His gaze shifted to the mother, who now lay stretched out near the door, her breaths labored, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. She hadn't come here for herself. She had come here for them. The Marine pressed a hand gently against one pup's chest, feeling its faint heartbeat, fragile but steady. He swallowed hard. The mother had carried her little ones through the brutal storm, holding on until she reached the only flicker of hope she could find. A lone cabin in the snow. It wasn't chance. It wasn't coincidence. It was sacrifice. She had delivered them into his care, her final plea written not in words, but in the desperate devotion of a mother's heart. The Marine set aside his own hunger, pulling out the last of his rations, dried meat and scraps of bread. One by one, he offered pieces to the pups, their tiny jaws clumsily gnawing at the food, tails wagging faintly as strength trickled back into their fragile bodies. He hesitated when he turned to the mother. Her eyes locked onto his, cautious yet yearning, torn between fear and trust. Slowly, he placed a strip of meat on the floor, then backed away. She sniffed it, ears pinned, before finally lowering her head to eat. The moment she swallowed, something shifted. Her body relaxed, just slightly, as if she understood he meant no harm. Later, as the fire roared brighter, the pups curled together in a warm bundle of fur. The mother, drained of strength, rested her head gently against the Marine's boots. He froze at first, then allowed a small, quiet smile. The cabin, once filled with silence and cold, now pulsed with life and warmth. In that frozen wilderness, 3 lives had been saved, and in return, a bond had begun to form between a battle-hardened Marine and a family that needed him as much as he needed them. By morning, the storm had eased, leaving the cabin surrounded by endless drifts of white. The Marine wrapped the pups in his jacket as he carried them into town, the mother following close by. Word spread quickly. A soldier in the frozen wilderness had saved a German shepherd and her litter in the deadliest of conditions. Neighbors, medics, and even reporters soon gathered, moved by the tale of survival. Photos of the Marine crouched by the fire, pups cradled in blankets, began circulating, stirring hearts far beyond the snowy town. Messages poured in from around the world, praise for the soldier, admiration for the mother dog's devotion, and tears shed over the fragile miracle of life preserved. In that brutal -50°C night, a bond was forged stronger than frost. And as people shared the story, one truth echoed everywhere. Sometimes the warmest flames are lit by loyalty and love.